So I would request one speaker on board to share his experience, how they are designing products which are human experience driven. Often I tell my developers to develop something, number one, world class, and number two, it has to be dumb proof, right? So here is Kristin Lau. He is going to tell us what it feels like to make things which is liked and loved by humans, right? Okay, Kristin.
Good on you, mate. Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, yep. Great. Awesome. So I just click through that. Is that going to load? Oops. Oh, no worries. Good afternoon, everybody. We're talking about the fourth industrial revolution, so I'm going to shatter the fourth wall and stand out in the middle of the room today because it's towards the end of the day and I want to make everyone feel awkward by doing some audience participation. So think of this session as a little bit like a game. The less engaged you look, the more likely I am to ask for your opinion on something. Sound fair? Awesome. Okay, good. Guys, what I would like to talk with you about today is a couple of different things, but mostly I live at the intersection of emerging markets and emerging technologies. So I spend a lot of my time between countries in Asia, specifically the Philippines, quite a lot as well. I normally live in Hong Kong, get to work with some very, very exciting technologies and also applying design thinking to those also. So, before we get into things as well, just one clarification. I am very, very aware that I have a girl's name. My name is Kristin Lowe. Everyone tells me, so I just thought I'd get that out of the way first. Because my name is Kristin Lowe, more often than not, if you haven't seen my picture, you were probably expecting a Chinese lady to show up. Sorry, this is what you've got. So we're going to spend maybe the next 25 minutes or so working backwards from that disappointment, and hopefully I'm going to inspire you with some of the things that we've got to share here today. So what I would like to do in the next 25 minutes is give you a little bit about my background. Hopefully that will inspire you in terms of what's possible for yourselves as well. Then I'm going to give you the very least amount of design thinking that you need to know through a fun exercise. And then I'm going to share a couple of the things that I've been working on recently, just to give you a sense of how things can go here in the future as well. Sound good? What's that? There we go, that's it. I'm benchmarking you against the Philippines, and in the Philippines, everyone goes out of their mind for audience participation, so that's the competition. Just to keep you awake here first, quick question. There's no right answer here, but I want to see where you're at. So by 2030, what do you think the largest type of company will be? What's that? Holograms, yeah. Tesla, possible. Pure water. It's a good answer, that one, I like that. Anyone else? Tesla again, we've got 2 votes for Tesla. I reckon Tesla will be all right. Google could in fact be, definitely, yeah. I think there could be any number of answers to that. One answer that I saw here recently I thought was particularly interesting was that someone predicted that the largest company in 2030 will actually be an education company. They've said online school there, but I'm not sure if it'll be a school or if it'll be online, but I suspect an education company could in fact be quite large by that point. Anyone know why? Why do you think an education company might be such a huge business by 2030? What's that?
Because of Australia, because so few people over there.
There are very few people in Australia, definitely. But what do you think about... Well, I tell you what, I think the reason I like this as an answer, and who knows if it's right, maybe it's wrong. The reason I like this as an answer, though, is that it highlights that the biggest challenge we have ahead isn't so much in terms of technology, it's more around what technology is going to do to us. We are in a position now where effectively all of us in this room, everyone everywhere, is going to have to compete very, very vigorously with machines at some point. And there is going to be a lot of time, energy, and money spent trying to keep up with that. So there is a lot of energy that we need to expend in terms of how we can develop ourselves personally, but also our communities and our businesses to take people on that journey. Otherwise, things can go quite badly. So I'll give you a quick view of a couple of the different hats I wear. I do wear a lot of hats. Mostly it's to hide the fact that I am balding way too ahead of my age. But the first one is with Brinc. And Brinc is a company that is an IoT accelerator. So we're an Internet of Things accelerator. I'm a partner at Brink and have been so for about the last 12 months or so. Brink started in 2014 and has begun with the mission of basically taking early stage physical product or connected services companies and helping them to become more successful. So in the course of doing that, in the course of those last few years, we have looked at over 4,000 deals. We have taken over 20 companies into our program. We have a team of 30 people. We have an office in the center of Hong Kong, also an office in Guangzhou, Shenzhen, just opened a branch in Bahrain as well. And we have a drones as a service program over in Barcelona also. So we get to spend a lot of time working on some very, very interesting... Do we have one here? I would love to, yes, I definitely would love to. I think that this is, for me, emerging markets are kind of where the whole future of the world lies. At some point in the very, very near future, most startups will be Asia-based for Asia-based consumers. Absolutely. So short answer, yes. And we're also, well, on that note, actually, we're also raising our first fund at the moment too. So Brinc Capital is in the midst of being launched. So if you have a startup idea that you would like us to have a look at, bring it our way, especially if it involves physical products, because we can basically be your interface to China. And China needs an interface, believe me. So the other hat that I wear is my probably where my heart lives most closely. It's Design Thinking Asia. Design Thinking Asia was a community that I set up when I arrived in Hong Kong in 2012. Basically, the first time I had even visited Hong Kong was the day that I moved there. I really didn't know much about the place. I just knew that the future of the world happens within a few thousand kilometres of where we are standing right now. So I started a community of people who were hopefully going to be interested in design thinking. It worked. They were. The community has spontaneously grown to a network of over 3,000 people in 12 countries across the region. And I end up hiring people from that network. I end up working with them to develop different types of capabilities or businesses in different countries as well. And in the course of that, I've gotten very excited about education and how education can reshape the whole surface of the region and how we actually work together, live together, and develop as businesses and communities. That's me having fun with some people in the Philippines. The Philippines is very, very fun for teaching. One other thing I've done as well, I set up the Bitcoin community in Hong Kong when I arrived. This was back in 2012. I've been part of the Bitcoin community very, very early, since 2010. It's been an incredibly exciting ride. I have to say, it was quite strange in the early days, barking at the moon, trying to convince everyone that this was a thing, but it's really gone quite nuts. And this is just a recent headline. We've just topped $1,900 per Bitcoin in the last 24 hours or so. I don't want you guys so much to focus on the price as much as I want you just to be aware of what the price means. I think one of the things that people tend to mistake Bitcoin for is that they think it's fintech. And I don't think it is. I think it's actually a political technology for reasons we'll talk about another time. But what I want you to do when you see that number, the price of Bitcoin, know that the higher it goes, the less faith that people have in the status quo. That's all it means. The more people value Bitcoin, the less faith they have in how things are right now. Also buy Bitcoin if you want. Now this is a bit of a strange picture. For the gentleman in the room, who wants to use this? Anyone want to use this? No, good. Correct answer was to not raise your hand there, definitely. So I wasn't always doing what I'm doing now. I actually began my professional life in construction management years ago. So I would manage interior fit-outs in large commercial buildings. And I got a little bit sick of that because what I would find is that we'd always work on successful projects. Projects were done on time, on scope, to specification, to code. Everything's perfect. Except for the fact when you walk into a room and you realise no one's going to want to work in this room. This room sucks. It hasn't been designed. And that was what got me aware of design in the first place. And I realised that you only really notice design when it's done poorly or if it's not done at all. And for me, this kind of sums it up. Now, this isn't from a project that I worked on or anything like that. That's courtesy of Google Images. But there is a whole series of systemic failures for those things to have been installed beside each other like that. And I think that design is the antidote to problems like that. Oops. This picture right here, this is effectively why I'm here. Have a look at that for a second. So there are more people living inside this circle than there are outside of it. And we're on the right side of that circle as well, guys. We're right here. So the reason I love this is that this kind of tells us the whole story of how the next few hundred years are going to go down. Basically, I think that we are at an incredibly pivotal point in history. A lot of the countries inside that circle, just by virtue of the sheer mass of people that we have, are in a position to have to solve some of the most complex and challenging problems of the 21st century. And if we do it, which we have to, and if we do it well, then we will set an example for the rest of the world to follow that will be an incredibly large advantage. So for me personally, I left Australia to get into the centre of that circle. I will spend the rest of my natural life inside that circle. I do not care about London. I do not care about San Francisco. I do not care about Lagos. Well, I kind of care about Lagos. Lagos would be really interesting to go see. But when it comes to startups, I get very, very tired of people kind of idolizing everything outside of the circle because honestly, where it's at is in the center of that circle. So all of you are in the right place at the right time. Please don't leave. Please stay. We need talent here. We need talented people doing what they need to do right here, right now. Stay in the circle. I'm also a little bit of a rabid fan of robotics. So this is Sophia. Sophia is real. She is I nearly said person, but she's not a person. She's a person-like robot. I did some work with a gentleman called David Hansen about a year and a half ago on Sophia, which is this robot here. So she is a pre-sentient humanoid robot. You can't see her facial expressions, but her face is quite realistic. The skin is quite realistic also. But she represents something quite interesting, which is everything that's happening around automation. So a robot like Sophia is not the type of robot that will take your job. She is far too impractical, and there is a much longer road of development before something like that touches us. But there are a far greater number of robots that are not humanoid that will actually impact how we work far sooner than anyone realizes. And the predictions vary quite a lot, but the upshot of it is that sooner than we think, more of our jobs are going to disappear to robotics, to software. So countries like Philippines and Bangladesh, specifically out of the entire world, are in probably the most unfortunate spot in terms of having the impact of this felt before anyone else. It's a bit annoying that we're kind of dealt that as a deal, but at the same time, I think if we use design thinking, if we value ourselves and each other enough, that we can actually turn that into an advantage. Because whoever solves all of these problems first is going to be in a fantastic position looking ahead. Somewhere like Australia is actually at a bit of a disadvantage because everyone's fat, lazy, slow, everything works, everything's comfortable. There's a million reasons why something doesn't have to be done today. We don't get those excuses here. We have constraints to work to, and those constraints will breed better business people. So what I want to do now, that's just a little bit of a background about me. I wanted to share that with you so that you have a sense of wherever you are now, whatever you are doing at the moment, that change is possible. You can take your life in whatever direction you like. The journey I've been on has been much more of a roller coaster than a neat progression, but there is a whole range of things that can be done, definitely. So what I want to do now, in the next small block, is just share a little bit of design thinking with you. I'm going to give you the bare minimum of design thinking that you need to understand. I find it's quite simple. It's not something that you should look at as though it's an expertise or that I have any special expert knowledge in it. It's really quite simple, and I'm going to show you why it's quite simple. And to do that, I'm going to give you a detective mystery. So I'm going to get you to put your detective hat on for me, and I'm going to get you to imagine that you are in Kenya. You're in Kenya in Africa, and it is 1985. You're in Kenya in Africa, it's 1985, and your profession is as an anthropologist. You are an anthropologist, which means that it's your business to understand how cultures work, how people work, why they make the decisions that they make, and what that means. So you're in Kenya, in a remote village in 1985, doing an anthropological study. It's a multi-year study, and you've come to this particular remote village to try and understand how people live, why they do the things that they do. At the same time that you are here, there has been a large drought that has hit the region for a couple of years now, and it's starting to change the way that people live, the way that they behave in these communities. So you take note of some of these impacts, you put it in your initial report, and you file your initial report, and you go back home. You spend about a year or so at home, and while you're away, an NGO sees your report, and they realise, oh, gee, there's a village here that doesn't have very much water. Why don't we do something about it? Let's build a well. Seems reasonable. No water, build a well, that should fix it. Good idea. So the NGO goes and they build a well. You come back a year later, and when you get to the village, you're very surprised to see that the well has actually been destroyed. You knew that it was being installed. You also thought it was a good idea, but now you're confused. Why has the well been destroyed? So my question to you now, the mystery I want you to help me solve, is who destroyed it and why? Who destroyed this well? Any ideas? What's that, sorry? Somebody hurt themselves? Ah, okay, so the people who the well was for were the ones who destroyed it. Okay, interesting. You are heading in the right direction. Okay. Who else has got an idea? It could be the girl. It could be the girl. Yeah, tell me more. Why?
Because she had something to do here in the first picture itself. She was doing something, and she's also sitting near a thing that looks like a well. So maybe she had some emotional connectivity. It's like I'm trying to empathize from her perspective.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, this is also starting to get warmer. You guys are good at this. Who else?
It would create further drought in the country.
Okay, so they thought if they had the well there, it might cause more of a drought, maybe taps the water table. Okay, interesting. Okay, I like some of these answers. Let's go over here. We've got another one. Excuse me. Thank you.
Maybe they thought that all the water is stored here and therefore the drought is happening.
Okay, interesting. Okay, good. I'll tell you what I see with these answers that you're giving me. They're all good. I love the enthusiasm. I'm seeing two buckets here that these answers fall into. One is about the well. Maybe it's broken, maybe it's damaged, maybe there's something wrong with the water table. The other bucket is about the people that are using the well. Maybe they filled it in themselves. Maybe there was an emotional connection they had to it. Something's going on there. So there's two buckets. Either it's about the users of the well, the people, or the technology of the well, the product, in a way. Well, what happens is that you then, you're still curious about this, so you ask around the village to try and find out more information, and you learn quite quickly that it was actually the women in that village who had deliberately filled in the well. So when I tell you that as a hint, what do you think was the reasoning there? Why did the women in the village fill this well in?
It's heavy.
Okay, they had to carry the buckets, so they were a bit tired of it, yeah?
So in order to collect water, they had to go far away. So it was a sense of freedom for them to go far away, collect the water, and they enjoyed that time together.
Okay, you two, prizes, correct. You both got that. That's excellent. So between the two of you, you've absolutely correctly nailed the answer there. That's exactly what it was. So originally there was a water source quite close to the village, and it was always the job of the women to go and get the water and some of the food and take care of a lot of the domestic duties. When the drought hit, that local water source dried up and they had to travel much, much further to find water. Usually about a 3-hour trip each way, so 6 hours to get water. And they had to carry the water buckets to do that. That sounds hard, it sounds difficult, and it was. And yet, what the women found on that 6-hour round trip was that they had a space to actually form friendships and bonds that they wouldn't normally have had the space to do so in their community. As long as they were in the community where the original water source was, they were always someone's wife, someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's mother. You know, they enjoyed their life, but it was different than the type of connection that they had when they were by themselves on that trail to the water source. So even though the well sounded like a good idea and clean water was welcome, at the same time it cost them something. And it cost them something which ultimately they did not value as much as the time and the bond that they had with each other. So they filled in the well so they could preserve that, which is very, very interesting. The reason I like this as a story is that I want you to think of that water well as a bit of an analogy, or a metaphor even, for some of the things that we do when we are working in business, either in a large organisation or even in a startup as well. It's very, very easy for us to build the first thing that comes to mind because it seems like an obvious solution. What I love about this story is that the well wasn't a bad idea. It was a good idea. It was an obvious idea. I would have built a well. Everyone would have built a well. But it was because they didn't quite understand the context that they were designing for that the well turned out to be a bad idea. So the lesson is that good technology can end up being a bad solution if it's solving the wrong problem in the first place. And that's what design thinking helps us do. Let's look at how. When I say design thinking, there's really just two types of thinking that we use. This is why it's so simple. The first is divergent thinking. This is kind of like the way children think. It's broadly what we would describe as more creative. We're thinking towards possibility. Wow, wouldn't it be great if cars could fly? Yes, it would. Maybe at some point soon they actually will. But for now, it's probably not very pragmatic. It's not very reasonable to expect that they will fly. And maybe it causes problems. But that's okay. When we think in this divergent way, it helps us create more choices in the first place. But the lesson here isn't that design thinking is just about being cuddly and creative. It's not that at all. It's about using... Yeah, exactly. It's about our thought processes and how we use them. So this is one mode of thinking. The other mode of thinking that we use to do design thinking is convergent thinking. And this is the type of thinking that all of us in this room are much more comfortable with at the moment. It's rational, pragmatic, analytical, paring down a range of options to the best possible choice. We're super, super good at it. Now, I'll use HSBC as a bit of an example here because they are my regular whipping boy, because they're a disastrous bank. Hope no one here is from HSBC. HSBC is a fascinating place because it's an enormous organisation filled with people who are very well paid, very smart, and also passionate about their careers and their jobs. They care about what they're doing. And yet, you will go to meetings with them, countless meetings of tons of smart people in a room, and they won't be able to agree on anything being able to change. Everyone's an expert in what's not possible. And it's because no one's actually combined both of these together. They're stuck choosing from a few different choices which are either bad or worse. And so as a result, nothing changes because they're only using one mode of thinking. So the magic starts happening when you combine these both together. And that's really all design thinking is. This is why I say it's not, don't look at me as an expert, don't treat me as an expert, because honestly, it's a little bit like chess. You can pick it up easily, the mastery comes through applying it. Just keep applying it. When you combine these two together, when you think divergently, it helps you create more choices so that you can make better decisions in the first place. You do those over and over again through a design process or an innovation process more generally, things start getting a lot easier, a lot quicker. You will get to a meaningful solution that does not run the risk of being a water well, whether you're in a startup or a large organisation. Make sense? Awesome. So, good question, Kristin. Why is design thinking critical for the future of Bangladesh? Well, I'll tell you why. There's 3 reasons why I think it is. The first is that design thinking thrives within constraints. So that pattern of thinking divergently than convergently, magically, it works better the harder a problem you throw at it. So if there is a really, really difficult problem to solve and you start working through a process in those 2 modes of thinking, it's a lot more easy to come up with a more meaningful solution than it is if you just throw something very, very general and vague at it. So in a country like Bangladesh or countries like the Philippines as well, we are rich in constraints. We are wealthy. There is so much that can't be done. And that's actually a massive, massive advantage now, because this, as a way of thinking and working, is much, much more effective at driving progress in environments where you don't have all of the infrastructure and all of the traditional advantages that other countries have. The second one, as I said before, design thinking. Think of it as a capability, not an expertise. It's not like a lawyer or a surgeon. Those are valid expertises. You know, if someone is a bad surgeon, they're going to kill someone. If someone's a bad lawyer, someone's going to go to jail. It's impossible to be a bad design thinker because the entire process is predicated on being okay to fail. It helps you fail meaningfully. In fact, I'd suggest that as you apply design thinking, you're not even right most of the time. You're basically just less wrong with the more iterations that you work through. So think of it as like a capability or a muscle memory that you're developing, either in your own team, for yourself, for your business, anywhere. And it's a fantastic way to develop and teach entrepreneurship as well. I love the idea that you can design your ideal life. You can design your ideal business. It's a much more effective way at looking at creating change, I think. So this concept of design entrepreneurship is something I would love to see come more to the fore. And I'm so utterly thrilled to hear the conversations that were happening this afternoon to get how like on the same page everyone here is about that. That's really, really encouraging. A lot of places I go to, I have to like really convince people that bad things are coming. Everyone here is on the same page and moving very positively in the right direction, which is wonderful. So how can we actually look at what needs to happen in Bangladesh a little bit differently? This isn't actually that different because of the comment I made just then. Everyone's thinking about this already the right way, and I'll give you the example here. This has come up a couple of times today, but I think the mental shift we all need to have is that we can think of data as being probably the world's most valuable commodity. If you think of it like oil almost. So when the birth of oil happened, there was a great race to tap as many wells as we could. People got the infrastructure out there, they pulled the oil out of the ground, and whoever had the most effectively won. We're kind of at that point now with data. There are so many human activities, there are so many parts of the economy, so many industries that are just largely unmeasured at all, and we don't have any data about them. But as soon as we get that data, we have a very, very powerful tool to start understanding how we can do things differently in a specific industry. So there is a race for us to get that data, and the 160 million people that we have in this country means that we are, again, lucky and wealthy because we are data rich, providing that we put the infrastructure in place to pull it out of the air and understand what it means. Somewhere like Hong Kong is not data rich. It's 7 million people. It's a city, it's not a market. It's a dysfunctional city at that. But I'll rage about that later on. So this pairs for me with one of the lessons that I pull out of working with a lot of startups. Part of my role is about working with startups and helping them become more successful. Another part of my role is to lead our venture building practice. So I practically start, build and sell businesses for a living. The one lesson I think that is most relevant and often most missed by entrepreneurs is that the only cost you're genuinely minimizing at the start of a new business is the cost of it not existing. Right? It makes sense sometimes to try and lowball, the cheapest cost on a specific vendor, but not if it comes at the cost of the business existing in the first place. There is the price and there is the cost of the price. And these two things are very, very important to get right. How that applies here is that we have a tremendous wealth of human capital in Bangladesh. And for me, if we don't kind of focus on how do we minimize, what is the cost that we need to minimize here, I think it's this. I think we need to unlock that human capital as quickly as possible because the price of inaction comes at the cost of the future of Bangladesh. If we don't move quickly, then we're in trouble. And he looks like he's having a great time in the rain. So I'll just leave in the last 5 minutes. There's 2 ways we've been exploring with this recently. I also deal with the government in Hong Kong and different parts of the Philippines as well. These are just some very kind of provisional ways that we've been exploring working together with them in terms of IoT specifically. And I think they're kind of relevant here as well. The first one is about mechanisms that can unlock the ownership of data. So again, if data is oil, how do we get it out of the ground? How do we get it out of the air? Some data is easy to get out of the ground or out of the air because it's very commercially relevant. If there's data that you can pull out that is going to lower your cost basis for a business, wonderful, awesome. Easy business case, let's invest in infrastructure, get that data, make more money, job's done. But there are very, very large, vast amounts of data that are not obviously commercially useful and yet still have a huge amount of human relevance. One example we had here in Hong Kong is that there is a huge amount of people that get injured quite badly or die when they're hiking on trails in Hong Kong. And there is some data that we need to be able to get to try and figure out how we can start reducing that as a number. So one thing we've been looking at there is how can we set up the mechanisms to make that possible for us to do in the first place. In this instance, it looks like setting up a foundation that pulls together different stakeholders from different parts of the city and getting them aligned on how can we pull this data out of the air and turn that into a solution that can be used downline. So it's kind of like a strange blend between public service and private enterprise that starts to make it commercially useful to get the data out. That's the first one. The second one is here, and this comes courtesy of the Philippines. The Philippines is also doing some interesting things, and they have kind of similar problems to Bangladesh in the sense that Manila is the capital of the country, and it is where most of the money and time has been spent in that part of the world. So all of the provinces outside of Manila, desperately poor by and large, and very, very underdeveloped. And yet it's where most people live and where most of the economic activity of the country is going to happen in future. So one thing the government there has decided to do, they've rolled out these things called negocio centres. Negocio is the Tagalog word for business. Sounds like negotiate, which gives you a sense of how Filipinos do business, very negotiable. And the idea with this is for the negocio centres to act as a single point of access to government services. Now, there is a possibility at some point in the future that as they roll these out across about 80 to 90 different spots in the Philippines outside of Manila, that you'll be able to start pairing different education services or different almost acceleration services to be able to help new, smaller businesses start thriving, getting up and going off the ground. Not all new businesses have to be the next Facebook. They don't have to be, these gigantic behemoths. There is no shame in having a small business. There is a lot of money to be made in profitable small businesses, believe me. You can do very, very well out of a very small business. So a lot of the challenges they have there are about how they unlock that, and I think that's some of the challenges that we have here as well. Design thinking and IoT and how we unlock all of that data is going to be key to that. So just in closing, absolutely I do back Shariful's earlier comment that the next 10 years is going to dictate what the next 100 look like, and there are genuinely very many easy ways for us to get it wrong, such that the next 100 years could be quite unpleasant. So the urgency, I think, cannot possibly be understated. This is the time to do it. So the final point here, one lesson I pull out of all of the work with the startups is that from a technology standpoint, everything's kind of done. Everything's done. Realistically, there is pretty much everything done, with the exception of a few sort of obscure scientific discoveries that will in time become useful. For the most part, we effectively have most of the tools that we need to solve most problems everywhere in the world right now, which means it's no longer an engineering problem, it's actually a human problem, and that makes it a design problem. So I always ask ourselves, now that we can build anything, what should we build? And I think because it's no longer an engineering problem and a design problem, we should ask instead, how can we design Bangladesh? Let's design a country. Forget products. Let's design a country. Come on. Good on you guys. Thank you so much.